Joining us now to break down all the other news of the week is great friend of the program, former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, great to have you here on the U.S. Report. Now, the huge news this week is that we've got a debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But there's a bit of a difference. The first one is happening in June, on June 27th, much earlier than usual, and it's not going to be in front of an audience. Now, despite all this, Joe Biden looked very cocky this week, throwing down a challenge to Trump.
Donald Trump lost 2 debates to me in 2020. And since then, he hadn't shown up for debate. Now he's acting like he wants to debate me again. Well, make my day, pal. I'll even do it twice. So let's pick the dates, Donald. I hear you're free on Wednesdays.
Mick, I'm getting sort of like jittery from all the jump cuts there in that video. How many times did they have to take that?
Yeah, I think there's probably at least 8 cuts there, James, and it does make you wonder how many times they had to shoot that to get it right. And it does set an interesting stage for the live debates. Keep in mind, there'll be no audiences, and there'll be a great deal of control over the microphones, but it will be live in June, which is much earlier than usual. And it's going to be must-see television here in the U.S. for sure, and probably in Australia as well.
Oh, absolutely. But now, another question, though. CNN has got 2 anchors, Jake Tapper and Dana Bush, to moderate this. Now, these are not, really big fans of Donald Trump. Has the Trump campaign walked into a bit of a trap here?
It's possible. Of course, we'll only know when we see it. But one of the controversies now is how much control over the microphones, the network, and those moderators will have. Will they be able to cut Donald Trump's microphone when he either goes over time or, if you want to be a conspiracy theorist, when he's saying things the moderators don't like? These are folks who have been very, very critical on the air over the last 6 or 7 years of Donald Trump. So giving them that much control is going to be an interesting thing to watch. It was an interesting move by the Trump team.
But another interesting move, though, Mick, is why did the Biden camp agree? And this is all taking place outside the usual committee for presidential debates that normally sets these things up between campaigns. What is happening here with the Democrats that they've decided we've got to get Biden out there in June? And one thing is, of course, their campaign needs a reset because the polls are dire for them. But I've heard some speculation that just maybe they're thinking, if he doesn't do well in June, there's still time before the convention or at the convention to change him out for somebody else. Mick, your thoughts on these ideas?
I'm hearing a lot of the same things. Now I'm hearing them more from my Republican friends than from my Democrats. But the theory goes that let's go ahead and have a debate now. This is the Democrats thinking, and supposedly. And if Biden stumbles or performs very badly, we can still replace him at the convention. Keep in mind, neither of these men will be the formal nominees of their party at the time of this first debate. I happen to think there's another motivation here, which is by going around the commission. And traditionally, over the course of the last decades, there's been a nonpartisan commission that hosts these debates. That's not in play here. Both candidates have agreed to simply cut a deal with the TV network. By doing that, they might be able to keep RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy III, off of the stage. And the Biden team, I think, was desperate not to give any more oxygen to the RFK campaign because they perceive him as an existential threat to Joe Biden.
Absolutely fascinating. Now, I want to talk about another big issue, and you've written about it at thehill.com. U.S. debt, and this is a crazy number to me, is about to surpass $35 trillion. That's trillion with a T, U.S. dollars. Inflation is at a 40-year high. CPI continues to rise. Biden seems to have lost a bit of control of the economy here. Tell us about just how dire and dangerous this situation is, and why are red lights not flashing everywhere over these numbers?
They're flashing in a lot of places. The places those red lights are not flashing, unfortunately, is the voters. I remember sitting in the Oval Office one time, James, in 2017 when I was the budget director, and a very prominent Republican had my budget, which was described as the most conservative since Reagan. And he leaned across the resolute desk to President Trump and said, "Mr. President, I like Mr. Mulvaney. He's really good with numbers. But let me make one thing perfectly clear. He's not elected, and you are. No one has ever lost his job in this town for spending too much money. They have lost it for spending too little." That's a Republican senator talking to a Republican president. The country is now 35 billion in debt. That's what $35 trillion is. And the red lights are flashing. You're finally starting to see Wall Street pay a little bit of attention to it. You're saying international markets pay a little bit of attention to it, but still not much. The Dow Jones Industrial Average hit a historic high today of 40,000. So it's not really filtering through the economy, but it is starting to get some attention. It's just not registering with voters, and until it registers with voters, spending is not going to change.
Yeah, well, I mean, I reckon you got all that money pumped into Wall Street and everybody else. If people start to realize how little's behind that, that could be a bit problematic. But also on the economy, this was fascinating to me. Joe Biden has announced that the U.S. is going to raise tariffs on imports from China by $18 billion and also tax Chinese-made EVs. It seems to me that these are really Trumpian kind of policies that he's going with. Does this suggest that Trump has basically won the argument on protection versus free trade?
Yeah, I think he has. And I think even the Democrats, many Democrats will admit it. Keep in mind, these are the same programs now that Biden is either continuing or reinstating that he attacked during the 2020 campaign. They always get some of that in campaigns, right? You're always going to take the opposite side of the person you're running against. But I think even Democrats are recognizing now that Donald Trump was right on how to deal with China. Trump's attitude was, look, you can't treat them like you would treat Australia, England, France, first world nations when it comes to trade. Free trade is for free nations, not for communist nations. And that is now a bipartisan attitude in Washington, D.C. What's going to be interesting to see, James, when we get to that debate, for example, is who's going to be harder on China, Trump or Biden, because they'll both be fighting with each other to get even more restrictive on policies regarding that communist nation.